I am very excited to say that I finally got time to interview Meagan McCarthy.
When I felt him take the gun out of my hand and I turn onto my hands and knees and I'm looking down the barrel of my own gun and he's like this and I hear the trigger click, the only thing that I thought was that was it.
Let's get right to it. September 4th, 2019 was a day that changed your life forever. And I'm grateful that you're here to talk to me about it. So can you please dive into what happened on that day?
Yeah, thank you so much for, giving me this space and this opportunity. So, September 4th, 2019, I was working as a deputy sheriff for the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department. I was assigned to the Victorville City Station, and it was the first call of the day. I worked the 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift, so we had just gotten out of briefing, and the call came over the radio of an unknown problem, which is, we have no idea. So I'm in the area. I respond. The sheriff's department, we ride one-man units, typically one-man response. We don't really have the manpower for much more than that. And, all we really had was a mom was on the phone. She was, communicating to dispatch, and then the line goes dead, but you can still hear commotion in the background. Like you can hear there's some type of argument going on. So it's bumped from a priority 2 to a priority 1. So I arrive on scene and I start making my approach up to the driveway, and the front door opens. Out comes the suspect, matching the description, matching, the address given. And he walks directly towards me, and right behind him is his mom holding a knife, and she's still on the phone with dispatch. So, based on my training and experience, I could tell something happened in that house, that the mom was in such fear that she needed to arm herself against her own son. So, we train on the 1+1 rule. If there's one weapon, there's another weapon. So I go to the suspect and I start patting down his pockets, and he just immediately becomes upset. And I could tell by his demeanor and body language that, it was going to be not a consensual encounter. He did not want me to be there. He did not want me to, conduct my investigation. So nonetheless, I place his hand to the small of his back, go to pat down his pockets, and he spins around and grabs onto my wrist, and we start tug of warring over my wrist.
Right.
And I start going through, the verbal commands, offensive tactics, all the things. I finally go to my baton, and he's able to take it from me and throws it into the ground. And he starts punching me in the face, punching me in the side of the head. So I, grab his head and I'm trying to pull him off balance. And then he grabs the bun on the back of my head and pulls me down and starts trying to knee me in the face. So that's when I knew that this was going to be a different type of fight. I have been in other use of forces, but by this point, everybody had complied. Everybody had been like, this is not worth it, except this man. He was going to take it all the way. So then the video kicks on that everybody has seen. So at this point, we had fought for about 2.5 minutes, and he's punching me in the face. I start feeling like I'm going to lose consciousness. The black curtains are coming in. And so I give him the command, I'm going to shoot you. And in hindsight, I got torn apart on the stand for this, but I genuinely did not want to shoot somebody's son in front of their own mom. I
Right.
did not want to exercise lethal force. I knew I had to, because if I didn't, I was going to lose my life. But I was hoping that final command of I'm going to shoot you would be enough. It wasn't. We fall to the ground. I take aim at his head and I miss. And then he traps my arm above me and we start fighting over my gun. So he had placed a hand in the trigger guard, which is how that round was discharged. But, due to the hand positions, the round wasn't able to eject. So it stovepiped, causing a malfunction. So he
Yep.
takes the gun from me. I turn onto my hands and knees and I'm looking up at him, and he's pointing the gun at my forehead and pulls the trigger. And I could hear the trigger click, but I wasn't dead. My brain wasn't processing how I wasn't shot in the head, but my heart was working, my legs were working. So I turn and run for cover, and I hear another gunshot go off, and I know he's shooting at me as I'm running away. So by the grace of God, a dispatcher knew I wasn't responding, so she sent my partners to me. So as soon as I get to that place of cover, 3 of my partners come down the cul-de-sac, take his attention from me. They get into a shootout. He goes to the hospital. I go to the hospital, and then we wait for trial.
You sound like you've told the story before.
Yeah, a couple of times.
Yeah, a couple of times, right? But in all seriousness, though, when you're in that kind of fight, looking back on you surviving that incident, what advice do you give to someone who finds themselves in that same situation? Because assaults on LEOs are on the rise, and it's dangerous out there. So what advice would you give?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think obviously you have to take your training seriously. I took, my firearms training very seriously. I was at the range at least once a week. Looking back, I wish I would have done more defensive tactics, more jujitsu, hand-to-hand combat, ground combat, because I definitely was not savvy in those skills. And, being a female, I have no problem saying that, yes, men are bigger, they're stronger, they're more powerful, but that doesn't necessarily mean that being a woman, you have to take the submissive role in that position. So looking back, I tell people, if you can take jujitsu classes, hand-to-hand stuff, just what you get in the academy is not enough. So,
Yes.
explore your after academy training and really dive into that.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up. On my YouTube channel, I have said that stuff till I am blue in the face. So I'm glad you're backing me
Yeah.
up on that. It's
Yeah.
very important, very important. Well, needless to say, there's the incident itself. Thank God you survived. But a lot of times when I interview people who go through such a like a dangerous moment, it's not necessarily the incident that gets to them, it's what happens afterwards. So let's go a few days after. I mean, how are you coping with it? What's going through your mind? Are you sleeping? Are you feeling just sick? What happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that the aftermath of a critical incident should never be more triggering than the incident, and that was definitely my case.
Well
You know,
said.
I Yeah, I remember the first couple of days having almost like an out of body experience because it was all over the news and I had to go into hiding because I felt like I live in a small community, and when people see something like this, they're not always supportive, especially in a community, Victorville is ranked the number 9 most dangerous city in all of California. So we don't really have the backing of our community members for law enforcement in general. So then you see something like this, and I felt like I was so guilty. I was ashamed of myself. A cop's worst nightmare is having your gun taken and then having it used against you, and then it being on, social media. I was just devastated. So I had a couple of days of out of body experiences where I was like, what happened to me? My brain wasn't processing. I'll be really honest, I didn't really set into the mental health for like months later. It's like my body was just in like self-preservation mode. It wasn't really allowing me to process what happened. But I was sleeping maybe like 45 minutes at a night because I would wake up and have nightmares and hear the sound. I could smell it. There were so many things that were just trapped inside my brain that wouldn't leave. I was going to therapy 3 times a week for an hour, and I was still in denial. Like, I'm fine, I'm good, because that's the cop answer. You have to
Right.
be good.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. How was it affecting home life? And I'm only asking that because sometimes when officers go through things, they take on the 3 words, I am fine.
Mhm.
Home life gets bad, but it's if they're not careful, it can be they'll look at it as other people's problems. Like you don't know what I went through. Everybody else is at fault here. And I'm not saying that's your case, but how was it at home?
Yeah, so at the time it was just my boyfriend, and now he's my husband, and my daughter who was 6 at the time, and she was still in school, so I didn't really have that, you know, period where she was home and I was having to be present. My boyfriend, now husband, went back to work, and it was like life didn't really change until months later is when I started to have little things that would trigger me. So, it's interesting. My husband works for the same department. He's on their full-time SWAT team, and we never really had the conversation of like what we would do in a critical incident. We never really touched on that. So we just kind of like danced around it. Like we never really said like Megan's not really Megan. It was just like, hey, if you need me, I'm here, because we didn't know how to approach it.
Right.
So then September, October, November, 2 months later, my husband gets into his first shooting. And so that was interesting. And then a year to the date, so September 4th of 2020, my husband responded to an active shooter and got into another shooting. So on my anniversary, on my alive day, I'm begging him to stay home, and he's getting called out like, I have to go. Like, this is a mobile home park, active shooter, multiple people down. I gotta go. And then I get that awful text message like, hey, I was in a shooting. I'm okay. I'm like, how can I be there for you when I'm trying to be there for me? And,
My
like I said,
goodness.
it took a couple months for me to really be like, Megan's not okay. We gotta do something.
Well, what? Well, let me backtrack just a little bit. After your incident and the days, weeks that followed, uh, how was the department? How were the officers toward? Did you feel supported? Did you get phone calls? How'd it go that on that route?
Oh yeah, I had so much support in the beginning. I mean, it was under Sheriff John McMahon, and he was fantastic. He would
Awesome.
call me and text me all the time, offer to bring by dinner, offer, so many like, hey, if you need me to clean up your yard, just being there as like a human, not like hey, when are you coming back to work? My sergeants, my partners, everybody was genuinely like, how can we help Meagan as a person? And people were very kind to my daughter at school. And I just felt like I really had, my brothers and sisters.
Good. Great. Great. But you did say a few months later, that's when things started to kind of fall apart. And that's why it's called post-traumatic stress, because it's
Yeah.
afterwards, and sometimes it can be years afterwards.
Hmm.
Um, but there is typically that one moment, like for me, when I was back home from Iraq, I'd been exhibiting symptoms of post-traumatic stress for a year, and I thought I was fine. But my dad eventually got to a point where he was like, I'm losing you, and I'm not going to lose my family. And when he said that, I realized, okay, I gotta do something differently. So was there some kind of moment for you where like, I have to change or else this is not going to end up going well for me in my future?
Yeah, actually, August of 2021, so nearly 2 years later, I tried to commit suicide. And, I had been going to extensive therapy, group sessions, single sessions, EMDR, color therapy. I was doing all the things, I was checking all the boxes, but I still was stuck in that mindset of, I have to get back to work. I have to be better. My partners are back to work. What's wrong with me that I can't go back to work? But no doctor would sign me off. So that was probably an indication. But it was an August morning, and my daughter was at school, and I had my son, who would have been turning a year in that December, and he was down for a nap. And I remember texting my husband, I don't know what's wrong, but you need to come home. Like, I can't tell you why, but something's not right. And I talked myself into taking as many pills as I could. I was prescribed 6 different medications at the time, and I grabbed my gun from the safe. And I honestly believe that God, for the second time in my life, was the presence of Him. Makes me emotional. But my husband walks in the door and he's like, Meagan, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm so tired of fighting. I can't do it anymore. I'm tired of fighting with myself. I'm tired of fighting with everybody else. I had that like internal conflict of go back to work, but you can't, go back to work, but you can't. And I was just tired of it. And so I got to that point where I was convinced that suicide was my best option. My parent or my, kids would be better off without me. My husband would be better off without me. I was not the mom and the wife that they deserved. So I was going to take myself out of the equation. And from that moment on is when I really said, for the second time, I need to take my mental health seriously. And that is truly when I actually took it seriously and I dived into as much therapy. I read as many books as I could. I started going to school for psychology because I wanted to understand myself. And that is really when I started to heal. So it was almost 2 years later that I actually started getting better.
That's amazing. And like I said before, we don't always know who's listening. So if there is someone listening who is having those suicidal thoughts, to which they don't have to believe, they have to understand that they don't have to believe those thoughts. But what would you tell them since you've been there?
I hate to say, to like minimize feelings because I feel like it's okay to feel and express. But I will say now looking back, I was my own demise. Like, if you get out of your own way, you
Yeah.
will realize that mental health and suicide is something in our brain. And I know that sounds so like eye rolling, like, no kidding, mental health is your brain. But if you think about it, when we're police officers and we run into a room and we see a suspect at the end of the hallway, we have blinders on. We're not paying attention to anything else around us. And unfortunately, it's called the fatal funnel. So in mental health, when you have crisis, you get the fatal funnel and you think that the only thing is suicide, it is self-medication, it's alcohol because you just want to feel better. But if you take off the blinders and you look around, you're like, wow, I have a family, I'm healthy, I'm alive. There's so much more, but you have to get out of your own way and allow yourself to be in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And thank you for adding that. Now going back to the incident, and you went a few years later into your mental health journey. Let's go years later, and some of the most shocking news. I remember reading the headline, your attacker. What happened in court?
Yeah, I remember telling the prosecutor it took us almost 4 years to go to trial.
Right.
And I remember telling her, I cannot testify. Like, there's no way. I've done way too much work. I am at a good place. I cannot go and unwind everything I just did. I don't want to look across from him. And I remember my therapist telling me, like, Meagan, you're going to feel so much better once you just sit up there, tell your truth, tell your story, reclaim yourself through this. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like the more power that I can give myself, the better I will feel. So I went to trial and I was cross-examined for 3 days, and I really quickly became the villain in this story. And I was painted as, the aggressor, and I wanted this to happen. The defense attorney told the jury that I woke up that day and I wanted to kill a black man, and it was bought and people believed it. And, we had some crazy California law that, unfortunately allowed some biased jurors to be jurors. But the whole time I was sitting there, I was thinking, it's no wonder that people don't stand up for themselves in our criminal justice system, because I am a victim of a crime and I am getting re-victimized sitting here. Like, what is the point? I might as well just let him take a plea deal. I shouldn't even have done this. Now I am thankful I went through that, because I can genuinely say that was the last chapter in my post-traumatic growth journey that I needed to prove to myself that I was strong enough and I could do it. And now I am the best version of Meagan I have ever been in my entire life.
Oh yeah, no, you definitely are. You are the proof that on the other side of pain is success like you've never seen before. You're the proof of that. We'll get to that in a little bit. But once the news did drop, and all right, you're back to coping again, or you're back to, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I mean, how'd you cope? That was really hard to hear. I mean, you went on national news to talk about it. I remember reading the headline like, you got to be kidding me. So if it hit me, and I didn't even go through, I mean, how did it hit you?
Yeah, my husband and I decided to leave out of town because it took them like 3 or 4 days to come back with a verdict, which is genuinely not good news once it takes a jury that long. So we were
Yeah.
like, let's get out of town. And I remember sitting by a pool and being there with my kids, and we were swimming, and I get a text message from the DA, and she's like, Meagan, I don't have good news. And I knew, I knew deep down that, because we had a couple bumps throughout the trial, that they had asked me if I would accept lesser charges. And I said, no, 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 no. Like, we've gotten this far. We didn't come this far to only get this far. We're going all
Right.
the way. And so, I remember reading the message like, not guilty of attempted murder, not guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, not guilty of obstructing and resisting. And I remember almost passing out. Like, okay, so I've gone through the last couple years of this, and basically a court of law just said that none of this happened. So then what happened to me? So then what is my brain processing and dealing? Like, what have I done? What happened? And so I remember going through the same exact emotions after my shooting of, I didn't do enough. I should have done this better. I should have done that better. And then it was weird. I woke up the next morning and I was a woman scorned. I said, you know what? I am going to talk to every single person I can. I'm going to go on every single podcast, every YouTube, every news station, whoever will talk to me, I'm going to talk, because this is not right. And if this happened to me, how many more people has this happened to? And like I said, I genuinely believe that God knew that had to happen to be my closing chapter on my book. And yeah, it was a weird 24 hours of like denial, but I was I was just angry, and I needed to share my truth.
Yeah, there you go. And when you're speaking about God, you're talking about the truth. And people have often asked me, because I mean, I'm Catholic, and people sometimes ask me like, how can a loving God let bad things happen and bad things happen to good people? And I say, look, his son was crucified. I mean, there's free will, but you can't doubt God. So God is using you now, Meagan, obviously. So what have you been up to nowadays since the incident and that, the news of the verdict? And you said you were a woman scorned, and you were going to talk to everybody, which you have been doing. So what have you been doing since all of that?
Well, I've just been trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I still don't really know where my path is going to lead me. I am thankful for all the doors that have opened. I am in the middle of writing a book, which will come out hopefully at the end of the summer. And I've gone to a couple of conferences and just spoke about, mental health discrepancies in first responders. And, I've been fortunate enough to connect with some people over at Fox News that have given me a space to have the police officers back and talk about law and crime as a former police officer. So I've just been, accepting whatever doors are open. I'm able to be home with my babies and, just seeing what the next chapter has in store.
Absolutely. Well, there's plenty of opportunity for sure. My question for you is, since you have left law enforcement, if you're like me, you didn't obviously anticipate having to be out of the profession the way you left. Mine is not like yours by any means. I just had to leave for family reasons, but I mean, I was going to be a lifer.
Hmm.
And so to those who find themselves out of the profession before they actually wanted to leave, or those who left because of medical retirement, what encouragement would you give? Because I mean, I still miss it. I'm sure you still miss it. How do you go through that, processing that?
Yeah, I was like you. I was going to do 30 years, maybe more if I could. I had my 5-year plan, 10-year plan. This was going to be my career. I loved my job. I adored it. You know,
Yeah.
obviously policing is a little different nowadays, but I genuinely loved being a police officer. So, you know, my advice is definitely find what drove you to become a police officer and just find that in the public realm. You know, I loved connecting with people. I was a school resource officer for 6 elementary schools, and that's where my heart was. So now I'm going to school for psychology and I'm trying to figure out if I want to do adolescent therapy or if I want to do critical incidents, you know, to help back with the first responder community. Or you can do both. So if you really loved investigations, go work for the district attorney's office as a civilian investigator. Go, you know, work for the state and do investigations. Go do private information or private investigation. You know, there's so many different avenues. People think that the only skill set you have is you're a police officer. But if you look at it, there's so many more things that it take to be an effective and healthy cop that you can go find something else, I guarantee to be just as fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who you are, you can take into other areas because you were never a cop as a person. You worked in that profession and you can still serve others in other ways. And very glad you said that, really. Now you do talk about your story and the mental health side of it on podcasts, and thankfully now the 10 Code Mindset podcast and other platforms. But I follow you on Instagram, and every now and then you pop into my feed. You're talking about other things as well. Is there possibly a future for you in politics?
You know, I never saw myself really getting into politics. I was a person that voted once every 4 years, and that was kind of it. I didn't really care about the local stuff. And, you know, my trial was influenced by a horrible piece of legislation that came down from the state assembly. So I kind of found myself in this weird rock and a hard place of like, I don't really want to be in politics, but the only way to fix what happened to me is to kind of wedge my way in there. So, you know, I'm going up to Sacramento next Tuesday to testify in front of the California State Assembly Committee on this public safety package that I've been working with a local assemblyman, Bill Asaley. And we've drafted, it's called Assembly Bill 3039. Anybody in California, you know, this really only applies to you, but it would basically take away that dangerous, you know, sentence in Assembly Bill 3070 that impacted my trial, that cops do get a fair and impartial trial. We are owed that in our Constitution. You know, our founding fathers put that for all people. So anyway, I'm, you know, going to see this through and we'll see what comes on the other side. If you were to ask my husband, he would say absolutely not. But, you know, we'll see what, you know, God, and I keep saying what God has in store, but I'm kind of giving the reins to him. And if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And if not, I'm just over here trying to advocate for whatever I can.
Yeah, you're a really strong person. Me personally, what I've seen, you know, from you and your interviews and what you've been pushing, I see it. I know your husband's like, no way. I see it.
Well,
Give it a 5-year, 10-year plan kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, we'll see. He wants to get out of California by then, so maybe we'll be in a different state.
Well, you know, I I do hear a lot from people. eh, You know, I don't talk politics. I don't get into I'm talking like what they tell me.
Mhm.
But the thing is, like, if you don't pay attention to politics, like the reason why we don't, if you don't pay attention to politics and vote the right way, well, unfortunately, it's going to start, and it already has, really hurting our wallets and other ways of life. So I encourage people from the local all the way to the federal level, look into it.
Yeah.
And if you just stay quiet about something, then whenever, I don't know, that, like me personally, those who love to expand the powers of the federal government, I'm not in agree. I don't agree with that.
Mhm.
If we just stay silent, and you know, it can become a consuming thing, and we have nobody to blame but ourselves. So I applaud what you're doing, and I hope you inspire others to take a stand as well, because it's kind of like now or never kind of thing. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, people always tell me, like, you're not a politician. Why do you care? Well, if you don't do something, you're a part of the problem. So if you don't like the way of the world right now, if you don't like the narrative that's going on in our public school system, taxes, gas, whatever you want to say, if you aren't being proactive, you are part of the problem. Therefore, you cannot complain about the problem. It's like, the people that complain about being 150 pounds overweight. Well, if you're not doing exercise, then you are a part of the problem. So it's like, it's very worldly and people don't really like to hear it. But I do think that, like you said, it's now or never. It's not just about my generation, it's about my kids and their kids. And I can see that this is not the America I want to leave to them. So if I can just do a couple tiny things on my time on earth, then what is that hurting? If at the end of the day nothing changes, at least I can say I tried.
Yeah. Wow. That's well said. Very well said. Considering there's a lot of issues going on in America right now. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm still grateful to be here in America. It's still the land of opportunity if you work hard enough. But I have a hard time with the fact that all of a sudden it seems like law enforcement is being looked at as the villain. Like every single cop's a criminal. How dare they do what they do? We're talking about people that put on a uniform that go to a call to assist strangers, to which I know that's a talking point, but it's true. It's a fact. Like when you and I worked on patrol, 911 was called. We didn't ask, well, what kind of person's calling or anything. We just went if people needed help. So considering the anti-law enforcement sentiment and the fact that, let's face it, some law enforcement officers are really lacking some leadership and guidance and mental health training on the personal level, it's a very tough time to work in the profession. So what encouragement do you give to those who are in a bad place or are feeling burned out? We need them on the streets and we need them to be the right shape mentally and physically. What encouragement do you give?
Yeah, first and foremost, a mentally healthy cop is a better cop. So it's not just about a big critical incident. It can be the financial struggles of the way of the world right now. It can be, a multitude of things. But if you're not taking care of your mind first and foremost, then everything else is going to suffer. And my sister works for the same department that I used to. Obviously, my husband still does. I agree. We need police officers. We need good, strong police officers to keep the way of the way of life. Quite frankly, I don't want to live in a world that doesn't have police officers. And I kind of see it as like a pendulum. Unfortunately, ever since, the Minneapolis effect of 2020, we saw it in Ferguson 2015, the pendulum kind of swings back and forth. But my hope is that over the last, I would say, 3-4 years, we have seen a giant shift in the way that people view every way of life, not just police officers, but that has impacted everything. So if we can get back to kind of the fundamentals by, I hate to say it, by people voting and standing up and being heard and being activated coming November, we can start to see the pendulum coming back to reality, making crime illegal again. If people pay attention to the right propositions and the right elected officials, it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to accept this as like the status quo. We can do something about it, but you have to do something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to the police officers out there, show up for yourself and you can show up that much better for others. And to anybody who's not law enforcement, oh, heck, even the law enforcement officers, you're still citizens. Show up, participate, local level, all the way up. I mean, well, heck, you know what? Let me start before the local. There's the family level. Do what's right for your family and then work your way up from there, but take action. Meagan, I cannot thank you enough. To anyone who wants to follow you on social media or find out how they can, help support you or get you on their podcast or YouTube channel, whatever the case is, where can they find you?
Yeah, it's just my Instagram. It's my name, Meagan McCarthy, with 2 underscores at the end. I have a Twitter, but I don't really know how to use it. I guess it's X nowadays. But yeah, if people want to follow along, we have a pretty cool community on my page of people that, just share their tips and tricks on mental health and, the way that you can become a voice in your local level politicians, like you said. So yeah, if people want to follow along, I would really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the 10 Code Mindset Podcast. Do not forget to check the show notes below for more information that can benefit you. And I ask that you please give the podcast an honest rating and review, particularly if you're listening to it on Apple Podcast. I look forward to talking to you in the next episode. Take care of yourself. Show up for you. Show up that much better for others. May God bless.